Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive leadership in college athletics. I am joined today by Steph Garcia Cichosz. Steph, greetings.
Greetings, Ty. Happy to be here.
Happy to be here, too. You may have heard on a couple of previous interviews, Steph interviewing people. Steph brought her on as a co-host here on the One Question Leadership Podcast because I don't have to always be the one asking questions. So I'm happy to have you on with 1Q, Steph. Hopefully it is fitting all your desires and needs in terms of interviewing people and helping people to tell their story.
It's a great outlet. You've done an amazing job. Your backlog, your archives of interviews are pretty epic, and we've worked together for quite a while now. I don't want to say how long because I like to think I'm still a fresh face with our enterprise that we were with before.
Yeah.
And that's no longer. So this is a great transition and evolution for both of us as storytellers and as supporters of college athletics.
Yeah, I think it's great. I've been doing 1Q since 2017, right? And so almost 10 years now.
Wow.
I took over ownership, I believe, in 2020 and changed the name from One Question Podcast to One Question Leadership Podcast, expanded the time talking to people, made the focus about leadership. And there's a backlog. It's over 800 episodes. Of course, the entity you were talking about was AthleticDirectorU. And had a lot of fun doing that. Did a lot of interviews there in terms of interviewing people about leadership. Some of the conversations were similar. Try to get a little more in the weeds with 1Q than with AthleticDirectorU. But in general, the conversations on both platforms were built so that somebody can listen to it 2 and 3 years later and still learn something from it. Evergreen is what we talk about, right? The term we like to use. And what I liked about it was that it gave me a chance to be in front of a camera. It gave me a chance to get to know a lot of people I didn't know. And then you find interesting people and you lean into the interesting thing that comes up in a conversation. That's one thing I liked about that whole AthleticDirectorU experience. How about you?
It was a very incredible platform. Huge shout out to the founders and to the whole College Town team for bringing AthleticDirectorU to life. And then, of course, bringing us on over the years to host interviews and conversations. It was such a great resource, I believe, for sitting ADs, for aspiring AD, for young staffers in the industry. And we had an awesome time. Got to go and be in person and rub shoulders with all the big wigs and to have interesting conversations. I'm very grateful that's something we get to do here.
Yeah, I appreciate Matt and Jason for starting it. I think I'm one of the best interviewers out there. But Matt Roberts, for me, every time I listen to the interviews, he always was a little better than me. And I always wanted him to do more interviews because I appreciate what he can pull out of people. Now, I'll tell you what I appreciate about you when you were interviewing. Over time, you started focusing on the things that were important to you. Initially, it was just about leadership, just about being an AD. But then you start to focus on being a mother, right? Being a woman working in sports. You start talking to different women who have the experiences of growing a tougher skin, but still being how some people believe a woman should be, but getting in this leadership role and making executive decisions and making things happen and having an impact. And just watching you do some of those interviews and evolve into the person who could talk about those things with people and be a mother and still try to execute on a high level and the ups and downs that brings that us as men don't have to deal with. So I don't know if there are any of those that stood out to you, but I just wanted to say I appreciate the evolution you had and talking about those things.
To be honest, we talked to men about those too. I had a great conversation with Sean Frazier about parenthood for ADU. I feel that the conversations did evolve and eventually we were able to weave in the personal side alongside the professional side of leadership with any AD we were talking to or any senior leader. I love talking about women's sports. I love talking about women in sports and in business. And so some of my favorite conversations that I can remember are, of course, with people like Sandy Barber. I had the privilege of sitting down with her multiple times and talking about her journey with formerly University of Washington AD Jen Cohen, having conversations with her and some of her team about mentorship.
We just did that exercise the other day, our senior leadership team. Maybe we're like, I don't know, a couple agenda items in, and I asked everybody to pause and take some time to reflect on who the truth tellers were in their life, who Who are they? And also, why are they truth tellers for you? What does that look like? What does it feel like to have people that you trust enough to actually tell you the truth? So it was an awesome exercise because everybody reflected and then they shared. And I think at the bottom line with that is like, you have to be with people that you do know care about you, that they do have your back, that they're consistently there, and there's a level of competency, right, and character. So I think there's some qualities that we're all looking for in mentorship.
And they had a very special era during Jen's leadership at UW, a lot of women in senior leadership roles, and that was very cool. And so talking to that team, and then of course some of our favorite people, again, both now with Learfield, formerly of Castiglione, of Kim Dameron and Dina Barnes, and just talking to both of them about their journeys and the way that motherhood makes them better leaders and more creative and more nimble. And so those were some of my favorite conversations. And I know you, similarly, if I'm going to give you the shout out, I was always in awe of you because you would have a full slate of interviews at Enacta and you would go up to someone and say, "Hey, I'm Ty Brown. Who are you? How long have you been in the chair? What's your story?" You would talk to them for about 3 minutes and then you say, "I don't know where this is going, but let's do this." And it would start and it would be this incredible conversation. And you have this skill of being very nimble on your feet in an interview. And you just go where the conversation goes. And so many people cannot sustain that. And so you have this endurance that you only see in an endurance athlete, but you have it when you're interviewing.
I appreciate that. In the beginning, I did create questions, and we would come to an actor NCAA with a list of questions for each interviewee and send them the questions ahead of time and either read the questions or try to remember what the questions were. But over time, the slate of people that we were interviewing at each conference became too many. And it was like, this is a whole lot of work, bro. And then I got to have this thing in my hand and I'm looking down, trying to remember the questions and not make it look like I'm looking. I didn't like that. When I watched the videos, I didn't like having something in my hand that I'm reading from. So for me, I just had to develop 3 or 4 core, what I call them, like assumptions or principles for interviewing, right? And those 3 or 4 assumptions or principles helped me to weave my way through an interview. And the first one was, I may be wrong, right? And so if I make an assumption about something, I may be wrong what I'm assuming. So that forces me to be curious. The second one was the art and beauty of a good interview was in the follow-up question. And the only way you can get to a follow-up question is you have to listen to what the answer to whatever question you just asked. And so I would have to listen. You got to pay attention so you can have a follow-up question. And then with this group in college athletics, in sports in general, I would always ask questions that people can answer, right? You don't want to have gotcha moments in sports. They have enough of that from the real media. So if I just ask you a question I know you can answer and elaborate on, and then I ask a follow-up question that will get us a little deeper into that, I'll get what you want to get. So if I operated from those 3 premises, then people felt comfortable enough to have conversations with me. So that's where that came from, to be able to do that. And then you start thinking about improv, like you go back and forth with somebody until you find the thing, whatever the interesting thing is. And once you find that interesting thing, you dive and lean into that interesting thing. And so that's how I treat an interview, is that we'll talk a little bit, we'll go. That's what the 3 minutes were for, right? The 3 minutes of talking to somebody before we hit record was to see if there was an interesting thing. So then you talk, that you lay that first groundwork we laid in the 3 minutes, and then they'll say something interesting, and now I'm interested. Let's go. So it was a good experience. Helped me a lot in terms of thinking and understanding about listening to people and being empathic and empathetic listening, of making sure I'm hearing what they're saying so I can process it and ask a follow-up question, because we know it's not just for me, but there's also an audience that is listening to be educated. So great.
What were some of your favorite / most insightful interviews that kind of still sit with you?
So right off the bat, Joe Castiglione, right? University of Oklahoma. It produced so many leaders in college athletics, commissioners and athletic directors and people in a number of different roles. And so that's just intriguing to me. I came up in the football coaching profession at the American Football Coaches Association. And there were a couple coaches that really were intriguing to me. main one being Hayden Fry at Iowa, right? He produced the Stoops brothers, Brett Bielema. Just it was a name, a number of different coaches, Bill Snyder, a number of different coaches that there's just like 11 or 12 head coaches that come from. And to me, it's, if you can do that, one of my philosophies is if you're an effective leader, those who you lead will go on to become leaders themselves. And just to see that in action, right, with Hayden Fry. So then you can start working with college athletics and see, here's somebody else who's done it, Joe Castiglione, right? And even Gene Smith, right? It's just a bunch of people who went on from working with these two gentlemen and become athletic directors. So his whole philosophy is be a leader worth following, right? Be someone that people want to follow, right? And that's how you be a leader. And so it's almost as simple as that to him.
You know, one has to know themselves and lead themselves before they lead others. And if they don't want to do that, they're going to struggle mightily in trying to lead others. Remember, it gets back to that one statement we made early, and that is, be a person worth following.
Right. I was recently listening to that interview, and one of the things, I can't remember the question I asked him, but he said, you have to develop people. The analogy was like a plant, right? If you buy a plant, you can't just set it on the desk and hope it grows. You buy the plant, you got to water it, you got to make sure it's in the right environment, you got to give it care.
But if you were to use an analogy of a person and a plant, if you go and you get a plant and you bring it to whatever environment you're in, do you just put it on a table and walk away from it and think it's going to survive? Well, it might survive for a period of time on its own because it might have some access to sun. It might have some access to moisture. It might have some access to nutrients or air, but maybe not enough for it to survive, let alone grow, you know. So it's no different than hiring. You know, sometimes people will go through the onboarding. You're new. Here's what we are. They show you where everything is, the HR department. Here's your parking space. This is your title. This is your desk. Go to it. And clock goes, you know, month leads to more months, and several months lead to a year, and here it comes time, and it's a personnel evaluation moment, and then the individual sitting down with their boss, and who knows what that kind of conversation goes on. Maybe there's some frustration. Maybe there's a lack of understanding of the expectations. Maybe they don't really feel good in their environment because they're not getting any feedback. You know,
they're not getting watered.
So I get it in today's world, you know, especially sometimes, you know, where everything is experiential and they've got to have immediate feedback. And if they don't get it from the people that they work with every day, why would anybody expect that they'd get frustrated and leave? Why wouldn't you expect that? I mean, because they're not getting any kind of feedback. And so I don't care if it's entry level, middle management, director, senior, it doesn't matter. They all need feedback, and they all need to be engaged with whoever it is that they work for and hopefully with. And it takes the leader to be mindful of that.
So that resonated with me in that conversation. And then I always like talking to Chrissy Raywalk, the former athletic director at University of Delaware. Something about the way her brain processed made me, I don't know what it was. Something about where her brain processed information and took that information and applied it, like almost like data analytics, but not data. I don't know. There was data in not just numbers. There's data in people. There's data in everything, how we use that to process things. So Chrissy was always a great interview. And then there were certain people that I put in the interview chair that I appreciated, like Miriam Merrill. Miriam used to be the AD at Pomona Pictures, now she's chief of staff up at Hamilton College. And Miriam was great because a lot of these athletic directors, they are in this leadership role and doing the things to operate at a high level, but their personal lives is like way over here, and they're like so way interesting. And Miriam always brought that in interviews, either that I did with her or she was interviewing other people. And there are a number of different ladies, a lot of the ladies, specifically Black women in Division III. There's a whole lot of Black women athletic directors in Division III that made some sense. And the commonality he talked about with Dina Barnes. Dina, to me, we only interviewed once, but it was great because we hashed out her core values and hashed out in real time how her athletic experiences as a point guard is part of how her leadership philosophy works. See the whole field, distribute the work, or figure out who can help us in the moment to be successful and pass the ball to that person and get to assist in any kind of situation. So some great interviews. There are a whole lot more that I'm not mentioning, but there were some great interviews over time.
One last reflection for me is when I started interviewing with Athletic Director U, it was at the SBJ conference in early December in Vegas. And this was a time when we didn't have this big booth set up and big stage.
I remember that. We were in like a hotel room or something like that.
We did it in a hotel room, and we had still a who's who coming through. And I was definitely a little starstruck, a little intimidated. I remember I interviewed former Big Ten commissioner Kevin Warren, and that I felt like a high schooler. I'm talking to this great leader. And someone who was on my bucket list to interview was Greg Byrne, AD at Alabama. And eventually I did get to sit down with him at a Women Leaders Conference. And prepping for that, for me, listening and reading other interviews he'd done, I noticed he had a couple of the same lines he would give.
Oh, yeah.
And I was intent on getting him to not say those lines and to get something different from him.
How do you ensure the stickiness of the Alabama brand today?
Well, that's a good question. Every decision we make, everything we do, we realize it impacts the image, the brand of our university. And so there is so much information out there on the forefront day in and day out that you have to continue to be open-minded to making sure social media platforms, marketing, how the messages that you're delivering. We're doing a number of in-house videos now that are really taking off through social media that help our kids with their brand, help us with our brand. And that's really, we tried to make sure we're being very, very thoughtful and very forward-thinking in everything that we do. And everybody needs to do that. One of Coach Saban's lines that he would use, and he actually used it on me pretty early, which when he and I were talking one day, and he said, Greg, the dinosaurs didn't adapt, right? So you need to continue to evolve in what you do.
That was one of not the first interview where I wasn't intimidated, but it was one where I felt more confident in my ability to have a great conversation, and it worked, and it was great. And I've sat down with him ever since, so other times. And I think that these busy leaders who take the time to sit down with us, they do appreciate having a different kind of conversation. And then I think that translates to the listeners appreciate hearing something new, getting a different insight, getting a different side of these people that they see the same kind of press conferences that they're giving themselves, to remember that we're all people and that this is a people business. And there's a reason why there's different fits for different institutions and different regions of the country and different sports. And yeah, we have a great backlog of conversations that we could pull up and get something different on every listening.
You're right. One guy you mentioned was Sean Frazier. And he's been on 1Q a million times, been on AthleticDirectorU. But I like having him on because this is my opinion and this is how things should go. So let's make it happen at a high level. And I love that about guys like that. We started setting up at Women Leaders because we didn't have a lot of women on the AthleticDirectorU initially. So we started setting up there, and then you start getting the women. All of a sudden, our AthleticDirectorU looks like the NCAA membership, or actually mimics membership in terms of women's, Black women specifically, right? And all those types of things. So I appreciate that experience, but that's no longer. College Town has decided to go in a different direction in terms of how they tell the story and provide the news of college athletics. But One Question Leadership Podcast, that's my baby, right? Let's go. So we can grow this to the highest level here in terms of what we do here. We'll still interview people, still do the same thing. I want to implement a kind of a framework. And I wrote a book. I was a co-author on a book a few years ago, a guy named Will Baggett. Will Baggett was a graduate assistant of mine. He's gone on to become an international speaker around the country, does a whole lot of things, talk about how you represent yourself and how who you are should show up in the terms of what you do. And that book was called The Blueprint for a Successful Career. And the subtitle was A Foundation for Developing Young Professionals. And the play on the word developing was his perspective that he wrote in the book was from a developing young professional. My perspective that I wrote in the book was someone who was developing young professionals, right? And so it's like you got to have this environment in place for young professionals to be successful. And then as a young professional, you got to make sure you create your own type of environment to be successful. So it was great. My specific part was called forward management. It was an organizational leadership philosophy to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. Basically, my whole philosophy on leadership. And it was rooted in like expectations and evaluation, right? Make sure people know the expectations so they can do the job that you've hired them to do, and make sure they know how they'll be evaluated so they can succeed at the job that you hired them to do. And it's a whole framework around that. 3 parts. I'll give you the 3 parts real quick. The first, there's 3 kind of like phases, right? There's the creation phase, create an environment for your staff to be successful. Cultivation phase, maintain this environment through the cultivation of good habits. And then the affirmation phase, affirm your staff as they are proven to be assets to you and your organization. And what I want to do, bringing you along, is I want to be able to structure the 1Q interviews in like segments based around those 3 phases. And of course, there are like tenets in each one of those phases. They may not all apply, but I don't know. I just wondering about your thought on that, on how we can do that moving forward.
When we started talking about this framework and this concept of giving segments to the podcast, it just clicked right away. It's so much of this framework is already embedded into these conversations that you and I are having organically. And so just to give it a little bit of framing, we're not going to go and preach the good word with every interview, but to set up the way we're leading the conversations, of course, leaving room for surprises and how the flow of the conversation goes. And maybe we'll get more strict about it as we go and we chunk it out a little bit more. But I know we're already both conducting interviews a little bit differently. And I think that's been effective so far without making it feel forced. And so this will help the dear listener out there to know what to expect. And maybe you're fast forwarding to a certain part where you're really just interested in that cultivation phase, or you're interested in the affirmation phase or something like that. It's not going to look different. It's going to look different for every person we interview because not everyone's an AD or an organizational CEO or leader, but this framework fits for almost every single person that we're having conversation with. Yeah, I'm excited about it and I'm happy to keep pushing forward with this framework in mind.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're excited about it. I'm happy that you're here to help implement this thing too. And I'll tell you why. That thing you mentioned that I did on Athletic Director U in terms of just improv the interview, that's how I work, right? And to have someone around with some type of structure to help me at least improv within the structure can always make something for a better interview. And I appreciate that. I need guardrails in my life because I'm just all over. I always say I'm half football coach and the other half is artist, right? Football coach may be organized and straightforward and bullet pointed, but the artist is, I'm coloring out the lines. I don't care what you're talking about. And sometimes the artist wins, and that's that improv. And we just go all over the place type situation. So yeah, I'm glad that you're here to help me. What are you? I know you've done a number of interviews we haven't published yet. Is there any of them that you are looking forward to?
I have to say all of them, and there's more to come. Mm-hmm. And I know that you and I are excited to keep getting back out there, putting pitches out there and talking to folks across the industry, across sports in general, not just restricted to college athletics. Yeah, I've had great conversations. And I think that everyone who works in this industry has a unique story. Maybe we have a similar pathway, but the way we move and jive in it is different. And so I'm very excited to start tapping into that and sharing more, again, within this framework of leadership and organizational culture and development and all of it.
Last couple of things here. I want to make sure they know who you are. Let me see if I can give you a structured way of telling us who you are.
All right.
I'm Ty Brown, right? Los Angeles, California. Went to Michigan State, tried out for the football team, didn't make it, tried out again, made it, End up earning a scholarship, didn't get playing time, but still earned a scholarship, left with 2 degrees. The struggle of not making it, father passing away, losing financial aid, but getting that scholarship, the struggle kind of helped develop me into who I am. End up getting on with the Football Coaches Association, started focusing on leadership, led me to One Question Leadership Podcast. Can you tell us who you are in that kind of framework, the struggle, the growth, where you are now, where you want to go?
Who says the struggle is over, Ty? No, I'm Steph. I grew up half in Texas, half in Northern Virginia. I was a cross country and track athlete in high school, decent, but not state champ. I ended up getting into the University of Virginia. They lightly recruited me. So I was a recruited walk-on, no scholarship, but had a place. I found success right away there. Sometimes you just need a chance. And that's what that gave me. And earned my way to a full scholarship. I was a multi-time conference champion, NCAA runner-up, left with 2 degrees, but also left with the opportunity to run professionally. Didn't even know that was a thing, but had a 10-year career sponsored by New Balance. So I was a professional track athlete, got to travel the world, got to wake up and wear sweatpants and train, and that was my life. But that also didn't quite fit my ambitions and my interests. And so at the same time, I started working for D1 Ticker as just a writer. I would write the clips you would read in the D1 Ticker. I would write the Total Campus Report, which Matt Roberts, if you're listening and you ever bring that back, please get me back to do that. I loved that. That was a very unique time and a cool product they had. Yeah. And so I was doing those 2 things. I was running professionally and aspiring to be an Olympian and didn't get there, but also working in this sports business, college business. They started inviting me to do interviews for AthleticDirectorU, met you, and just kept evolving from there. Once I retired from sport, started my family. I have 3 little boys now. Lived in different places, worked for D1 Ticker. I've worked for an executive search firm, coming off of a maternity leave and needing a little more space in my life for parenting and for creativity. I'm just being a mom and letting my curiosity lead, and have the privilege to do this with you here on 1Q and doing some coaching, track coaching at the high school level, coaching adults who are aspiring to be great marathoners or 10K or half marathon athletes. So doing all the things I love, parenting, coaching, questioning.
Hopefully 1Q provides at least that questioning part. We can give you a little bit of outlet to keep it connected to college athletics and to keep interviewing people and helping people tell their story. Steph, glad you're on with us at 1Q. Look forward to your interviews, and I appreciate you joining the crew.
I'm excited to be here, Ty. Excited to keep this magic rolling. You and I did some really fun things with ADU, and now we'll keep it going here on 1Q.
Yes, ma'am. That was Steph Garcia Cichosz. Steph is the co-host of the One Question Leadership Podcast. And of course, I am Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.